Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Hey, Youth Worker Nation, this is Doug Edwards again with Youth Worker on Fire, and today we're in the home of one of my former students and former associate staff, and that is Nicole Keene Dean. How do you like that? Nicole Keene Dean. Yeah. She's all about organization, so she made sure that she married someone that rhymed with her last name. And so we're here with her today, and Nicole, her history with me is that she came to high school club, I think was your first clubs, freshman or sophomore year, I can't remember. Sophomore year. And then she survived that, went through those clubs with us, and then she went to college, and then she became an associate staff. She was a missionary to Amsterdam a couple of times, was a Florida Gator.
I was.
You're also valedictorian of your class. And you were a friend of April's, and I'm only going to say that about April because you're the person that called me up one day and said, I got it. And I was confused, and I said, you got what?
It's a very open-ended statement.
That's right. And then you said, I got it. I understand about Jesus and about salvation and that sort of thing. And so I call April up, and I go, April, good job. And she says, what did I do? I said, well, you helped Nicole understand that. She says, I don't remember that at all.
It's true.
So that's a Holy Spirit moment. That's one of those God sightings, And so that's where we are up to this date. By the way, she's got two wonderful sisters. Her mom and dad are just awesome. They let us invade their property a few times. We were, doing high school club, and I think you brought middle school girls over a couple of times. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. So Nicole, from there, catch us up to date.
I did go to Amsterdam. That not only was a big ministry experience for me, it also kind of sparked a career change. So I had been working in advertising and wasn't loving that. And so I went and I lived overseas for a little over a year. And when I got back, I got into teaching. And initially just as a teaching assistant to kind of make some money because missionaries are, so overpaid.
Yeah, they are. They're overpaid.
A lot of extra money laying around. But loved being in the classroom. And so went and got my teaching certification, and the rest is kind of history. I've taught fourth grade for about 7 years, and then went into ESE teaching for a couple of years, and then actually ended up teaching history, U.S. history at the local high school. And now I'm back at the elementary level, and I'm teaching writing. So that's just kind of bouncing around, trying out different fits.
Yeah, well, it sounds right for your capacity, your genius level. She is, we're all a genius to some degrees, but very few of us show it in school.
Can you tell my husband that? Because I need him to.
He just doesn't get it, does he yet? I'll see if I can talk to him.
Sometimes.
No, he's pretty smart himself.
Yeah, he is very smart.
Yeah.
I'm happily married. We've been married for, I have to think about that for a second. 9 years, 8 years. 8 years this year. And we have one son, Dexter, who's 5 years old, and he's in kindergarten this year.
Amazing.
And it's good. Life is pretty good.
And your dog met me at the door.
My dog is pretty awesome, actually. He is the best dog that you'll ever meet. So you're welcome.
Is he a brand?
He is half boxer, half German Shepherd.
Oh.
That's what I'm saying.
Usually they eat you. So,
awesome.
He didn't eat me. That was good.
Very exciting.
All right. Well, good. Going from those different parts of education, from elementary all the way to high school, quite big transitions. But probably, I'm going to guess that kept you from being bored.
That's exactly what it kept me from being. Yep. I tend to want to try new challenges and find new ways to to expand what I'm doing and what I'm focusing on. So, and luckily my principal understands that about me. So she's very encouraging. So I've had a really nice opportunity to try out some different fields.
Yes. Yeah. And once again, we just talked about this. You could have gone to Duke University on an engineering degree, right?
I could
Scholarship.
have, yes.
And that's your brain capacity. I want people to understand that. And the reason I want them to understand this in youth pastors in student ministry, it was so ironic in my career, and that was I never went a year without a valedictorian somewhere. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we'd have a couple from two different schools or salutatorians, and I was nowhere near any of that when I grew up. In fact, I think they put a barrier. They wouldn't let me go over that. Don't mix with these people. I don't want you bringing their IQ down. But we all have genius levels, and I'm guessing that may have been part of. I have no idea how we attracted guys like you, unless it was my wife, who is very brilliant.
She is very brilliant.
Yes, and we had some other staff, and we believed in a lot of associate staff. So tell me that one person who was your biggest influence.
Outside of my parents, it's actually not, you've actually already mentioned her. I would have to say that it was April. It was April Jones. And she, was a friend, turned into a best friend at the time. And it wasn't just the fact that she totally changed my life by just being open and honest about who she was and how much she loved Jesus and how much that relationship with God influenced her life. But just that she also, I was always a very shy, kind of quiet, intellectual bookworm. And I played sports though too.
Yes, you did.
I did play
sports.
But
tell them your sports. What sports?
Lots of them. Soccer, swimming. I played golf, track. Mm-hmm. But she became my closest friend, and we just navigated the waters of high school together. I went off to college, and we stayed very close. We went through several tragedies together, her own tragedy with her dad and then with Beth. Mm-hmm. And, that's just the kind of relationship that it's forged in fire, and it has a huge impact. And it did help create who I am today. Mm-hmm. So
yes. Now, did you go to church growing up?
Not really.
Okay.
I would go with friends if I spent the night.
Right.
But not with my family, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of transition was that for your family once you asked Christ to your heart? And I know they're very supportive people. It has nothing to do with that, of course.
They are. It was hard for them they didn't quite understand what it was to me and what it meant to me. And because they'd had such a negative, both of my parents, not my sisters, but my parents had such a negative experience in the church growing up in kind of an old style Catholic church. Mm-hmm. And, some of the more stereotypical negative experiences that you can have, they both seemed to have those growing up. And so, yes. But luckily for me, they associated that specifically with the actual church building that they grew up in. They didn't associate it with Christianity. They didn't associate it with faith. And so they were very open to hearing me talk and to, letting me go to whatever events I wanted to go to and inviting people into their home, inviting
yes.
you into their home. They were very open to that. So that, I'm thankful for that they were willing to let that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. What about your favorite teacher coach?
I had a lot of coaches over the years, and coaches have a huge impact on your life for sure, because they teach you determination, they teach you grit, but there's not necessarily one that really stands out. There is a teacher though, Mr. Cruz at the high school, who high school wasn't that challenging to me. And I'm lucky that it wasn't that challenging to me. I'm very, but he made it fun and he made it memorable, and he came up with out of the book assignments that stick with you. And he also just encouraged conversation in his classroom. He encouraged you to question him. He encouraged you to come up with different ways to explore what we were learning. I had me and a couple of the other people in class, Tim and Alice, put on a little Shakespearean play one time, just because he allowed that kind of creativity and that kind of exploratory learning in a literature class, which doesn't normally happen. So I would have to say Mr. Cruz, just encouraging that love of creativity for sure.
Yes, and he was one of my favorites too. I'm a youth pastor volunteering on campus, not exactly what most people want.
Right.
And Mr. Cruz, as long as he was there, invited me into his classroom openly, and it was great. He's a great man.
Yeah.
Great teacher. So that's great to hear. That's great to hear. And so let's talk now about your worst adolescent moment and your worst, which could be all the way through college, and your worst and your worst ministry moment.
I would say going away to college is one of my best and my worst adolescent moments, because, I was so excited, and I was really just ready to go away to college, but I had to leave everything behind, including my best friend. And that's hard. And friends mean so much at that point in your life. Like, friends really are your family's your world, but friends are your everyday.
Right.
And that was tough. That was very tough.
Our worst ministry moment.
I would have to say it was literally, I believe, day 2 when I decided to join you for middle school ministry. Yeah. And I had been warned about a couple of the girls just being a little sassy and being just not that easy to handle.
Those are probably 2 of the most memorable middle school girls in the world.
And one of them, Hillary, she was missing. She wasn't in the room. And everybody else was busy. And, I was still trying to kind of find my footing, and I didn't know anyone that well. I mean, I knew the other staff, but the kids. And I was tasked with finding her, which, immediately, oh, great. So I am looking in every room, and I am opening doors, and I'm calling out her name, and I'm trying to find her. And I eventually find myself in the bathroom. And I'm looking where you would normally look, under the stalls, in the stalls. And I'm looking, and I'm calling, and I hear something, and I call Hillary. And immediately I hear, "Ugh, not you." And it comes from above. So I look up, and she has somehow climbed on top of the stall walls and is stuck on top of the bathroom stall and cannot get down because she's just, terrified of stepping in the toilet, and she's in 6th grade and she just can't get down. And she is refusing to allow me to help her because it's me. And she doesn't know me, so she doesn't like me, and I need to walk away, and I need to go find somebody else. And that was just very discouraging and crushing, because I'm here. I'm like, you won't even let me help you down from a bathroom stall. That's awful. But eventually I did get her down and told her to just, deal with it. And, that was the start of a beautiful friendship, of course, but that was not really a good way to start my middle school staff career.
Went through law school. She's one of those, she's highly intelligent, just like you are, but pushed a lot more buttons.
Yes. She tends to still do that. Push buttons. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty bad moment when you're starting off.
Oh yeah.
So we talked about this. I've never asked this question before. Funniest ministry moment.
Oh my goodness. I worked with middle schoolers. So on a day-to-day basis, it's, hilarity, not usually at their expense. You try to hide it from them, but it's usually at their expense. But so we had planned, the staff had put a lot of effort into planning this play about, relationships between boyfriends and girlfriends and how to best navigate those. And so we had, and there's several of us female staff and there's several of us male staff, and we're all friends. But one of them particularly, his name was Evan, was kind of a stoic, very quiet, silent, not really prone to a lot of silliness necessarily on staff. And he got elected to play the boyfriend. And so he's up there on stage, and one of the other girls, Serena, and we're all up there and we're all playing our parts. And Serena, who's kind of a wild card, is supposed to come in and be his girlfriend. And none of this is all improv. None of this is planned. And she walks in and kind of skips over to him with a smile on her face. And it's like, "Oh, hi." And she sits down next to him and puts her arm around him and just lays her head on his shoulder. And she goes, "Oh, Evie." And everything stops. And the kids are on the floor. And all the staff are on the floor. Like, we can't even continue the play because because he's sitting there looking at her like she's grown two heads. And he's like, what have you called me? And from that moment on, like the kids, all the staff, everyone called him Evie. Oh. And so it just, and we refer back to that. Even now, we'll talk about that moment when all of us just died laughing because we couldn't believe that she would call him this name that just did not fit him at all.
And I don't think this really affected him. Once he went through 10 years of therapy, I think he's fine now.
He's better.
Really.
He's better to this day, yes.
It was worth that moment.
He's grown past it. It's true.
Okay, let's go to Amsterdam, though, because that's a uniqueness with you. Worst ministry moment there.
So Amsterdam
and once again,
was...
crazy thing for you. Your parents supported you,
yes.
but they're going, what? Are you kidding? And yeah, go ahead.
I don't know that my mom really supported it. She kind of just didn't say no. So
yeah,
she was very stressed out. But Amsterdam was all over just life-changing experience. I mean, the entire time that you're there and you're working with this Christian organization. And on one hand, they run hostels, Christian hostels in the city of Amsterdam to bring in money to fund their other endeavors, which is to help refugees, to help homeless, to help. They have a ministry that works with the girls in the windows to try to be an outreach to some of them if they.
What are the girls in the windows?
What's that?
Tell them who the girls in the windows are.
The girls, the prostitutes that are in the windows, girls and guys, I should say, girls, men and women in the windows, some of whom have been in that business for a very long time. And some of them are there voluntarily. Some of them are not. And it takes a very long time to build a relationship to identify who might need your help and who might not. And so this is one of the outreaches that this organization, Tot Hart des Volks, they do this. But when you first get there, you basically work in the hostels, and then you work with the homeless ministry. And then if you're there for a longer time, you work with the refugees. And so I got an opportunity to do all of that. And I would say that, just worst moment over there was just honestly having my entire worldview shifted and realizing how big the world's problems are and how what horrible things have happened to people in this world. And that they've been able to go through these things and they've had just these experiences that would shatter anyone. And that, they're still there and they're still breathing, but they're not. And to just have, as a 23-year-old, to realize just how broken and how horrible some people's lives are, that was just tough to handle, tough to hear.
And you'd been to Mexico.
I had.
You've dealt with some poverty there.
I had.
And third world, but this is different. What was the difference?
The difference was that, while I would say the homeless ministry was pretty similar, you have people who have lost everything because of sometimes through their own choices, sometimes through not their own choices. That I believe you can find, similarities pretty much everywhere. It was when I began to be able to work with the refugees, when I heard stories of people who had been hunted out of their own countries, when I heard stories of people who had watched their children be killed in front of them. This is not something that you encounter every day. It's not something that you definitely don't encounter growing up in Eustis, Florida.
Right.
And it's a shift of mindset.
Although those people are in Eustis, Florida, they are in the United States. We just, in the situation you're in, that was a saturated situation of those people, and they're not easily identified in areas like we're talking about here. And because every once in a while somebody will pop up and you'll hear a similar story. But you were saturated. You'd seen the third world in Mexico. Now you're in this first world economic world. In Amsterdam, in a major city, world-known city. Everybody knows of Amsterdam or goes there or something.
They know something of Amsterdam.
That's right.
They don't usually know the whole story.
Many of them go for the wrong reasons. Very bad reasons. And so you're in that. And I'm sure your mom was concerned about some of those things too.
She was.
Yeah, absolutely. As we all were for you. But it was interesting, though. That didn't come through our ministry at our church. You came to me and told me about it. You were going where, and what happened that light bulb came on to go there?
I was hanging out with a friend for the weekend down in Orlando, and she was involved. Her church that she had been going to was just setting up a new college ministry, and it was brand new. And so she really wanted me to go with her to the first meeting. And we got there, and the funny thing is like, by anyone else's standards, this meeting probably was a disaster. Did not go well. The music wasn't working. The speaker was late. They had nothing. And so we were sitting there for 15, 20 minutes, just all of us at tables chatting and not really having any sort of meeting, and no organizational structure, anything like that. And all of a sudden, another girl who wasn't a part of the staff, who was just there, stood up and said, "Hey, I don't know if anybody's interested, but I just got back from a trip overseas, and I happened to stay in Amsterdam. And I encountered this hostel while I was there, this youth hostel, and it was called The Shelter, and it's a Christian hostel, and I was curious. So I have some information, and it's a ministry opportunity, and if anyone's interested, please come see me." And I mean, there's a cacophony in this room. I mean, everyone's talking, she stood up, but she didn't have any way of really stopping people from talking. I'd been talking to my friend, and I just immediately stopped and turned my head, and I just knew, I looked at my friend, Tracy was her name, and I said, "Tracy, I'm going to go. I think I need to go to Amsterdam." And she was like, "What?" Although Tracy knows me well enough that she really wasn't that surprised, but I just knew that I had to go. And so I went and got the information from the girl and applied, and there you go. Quit my job, ran overseas,
Yes,
typical stuff.
Some pretty radical things.
Yeah.
Tracy wasn't necessarily for it. How many other friends tried to talk you out of it?
Probably most of them, including my now husband, who at the time
get a
did
clue,
not
youth
want me
workers,
to go.
Get a clue, youth pastors.
There wasn't. I mean, you were supportive. You were always supportive, Doug. But
I don't mind sending other people's kids into
just
danger.
go, no problem. But no, they all thought it sounded great, but they were nervous about the reality of me actually going. So that was tough for them. Yeah.
And once again, when we do the right things that we know God's leading us to do, there is usually opposition.
Yeah.
There are people that don't want us to win because that might mean they're required to win. And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In a certain area. And then there's other people that are really fearful for you.
Yeah.
And so all those things work more against you than for you, but that's the challenge we go through when we're dealing with some kind of ministry that's going to really impact some people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you went twice.
Well, I did. I went, I initially signed up for 3 months because that was what you could, unless you were going to sign up for like years, you could sign up for 3 months. And that was the amount of time that you could go without having to get a work visa and without having to really do all these other hoops and things to jump through. And I went there, and that's when I worked with more of the homeless. It was kind of the entry level over there. And I loved it so much. And I just realized, that I had kind of allowed my own fear to dictate that I was only going to go for 3 months, that, it's no big deal. It's just 3 months. And that was kind of comforting to my mother and to everybody else that it was not going to be a very long time. But as soon as I was over there, I knew that was not going to be enough. And so when I got done with my 3 months, I traveled a bit, but then I came home and worked, just got some random jobs just to raise some money for that work visa. And I went back as soon as I
How long did you stay the second time?
I was there for another, I believe, 10 months after that.
That's a long time.
It is a long time.
How did it feel?
Amazing. I mean, I look back.
Was it harder or easier than the first 3 months?
Harder, because it was a different focus. And because I'd already been there for 3 months, they counted that into my stay. So I was able to immediately start with some of the training for working with the refugees, and I was able to work directly with some of them and learn, I kind of took a step up. So I was able to be more of a manager in certain areas, and which on one hand, gives you a little bit more responsibility, but also it gives you more responsibility. And you take on responsibility for these people that are coming to you and that have nothing. And and just are looking for something. And yeah, so it was harder, but it was better. It was what I was thinking it was going to be.
And you organized middle school club for us. Serena passed the baton to you. And so that's kind of like in your wheelhouse. It may not be what you want to do, but you are more than capable of managing. And I'm managing a youth pastor is like managing monkeys in a room, so.
Yes, that's true.
So I was very thankful for that. Now here, I want to go back to Amsterdam for this.
Okay.
Second book I've written, I haven't published any of them yet. We're wanting to publish this one soon, called Rest Up. I talk about reentry. NASA thinks that's a big deal.
They do,
know?
Yes.
The ministry you were in Amsterdam also thought that was a big deal. And I talk about you there.
Yeah.
And tell us about the book that you were given and why they gave you that book. People have not been overseas or been to third world even for extended periods of time or dealing in opposite cultures from themselves don't understand what you're going to tell us.
Well, I mean, and it wasn't just a book. We actually were assigned a senior staffer for I believe it was 3 to 4 weeks before we were going to leave to go home, that we had to meet with on a weekly basis to just talk about not just our feelings about what we had done while we were there and the experiences that we'd had, but what we missed about back home, what we were looking forward to back home, and what we thought life was going to be, but also just strategies to, of course, they recommended journaling. They recommended just taking, setting aside a certain time every single day to breathe and to realize, but they also did some emotional counseling too. And they just recognized that, when you get back home, like there's going to be a huge emotional shift and you're going to be angry and you're going to feel mad at people that you love because they don't get it. And they haven't been where you've been. And you're going to be walking into a Starbucks one day and you're going to be angry at that Starbucks and angry at yourself for wanting to get that Starbucks because it's going to feel so frivolous compared to everything that you've just done. And they addressed it. I mean, they really did a lot to address those feelings, and they were completely right because it's almost like, it's like stages of grief, because you're coming home and you go through the angry stages and the denial stages and then the acceptance stages and the realization that, it's your life is different than what it was, but you're also different when you get back home. And so it was a huge adjustment, and they recognized that. I think one of the hardest things about ministry and about teaching as well. So of course I've gone into a career that does the same thing. Is just the idea that you don't really know the impact that you're making. You don't really get to see that or know that on a daily basis. You just have to kind of have some faith and have some trust that you are making a positive impact on somebody's life. And, I worked in day out with, some people who had been through things I couldn't even fathom. And one of them, which I'll leave his name out of it just because I should. I was working late one night at the reception desk at our hostel that was right smack dab in the middle of the red light district. And I was kind of the night person there. And so it was just me and a manager and then one other person who was kind of back office staff. And nobody had come in a while, and we were about to close. We closed at 2 a.m. every day. And and we're laughing and we're kind of doing these things. And I heard the door open, which was unusual. We didn't usually get anyone right. It was like seriously 5 minutes to closing. And I looked over and, looking back, I just realized, I looked over and it was a guy. It was a man, probably mid-20s. And he looked a little worse for wear. He looked pretty raggedy. Looked like he'd been, having some tough times. But we had kind of you would walk in the door and there was a holding area, because you did get some dangerous people sometimes in the red light district. And then we would have to buzz you in order to get into the actual hostel. And he looked over and he just said, I would like a place to stay. And seemed very, so I said, oh, okay, great. And I looked at my manager, he said, yeah. So I buzzed him in, and he came over to the desk, and there was a lot of issues because he didn't have a passport and he didn't have all these things. But he obviously needed somewhere to stay. And, we had ways of working that out. We had, ways of helping some of the people who needed a place to stay. And so my manager was going to work on that. So I was just chatting with him at the desk. And that's what I remember. I remember just having a conversation, and honestly, like, he seemed nervous. And so I was just trying to talk to him and kind of tell him about, like, oh yeah, you'll probably get a room and you might be able to stay for like a month, if you're able to do that. And like, I was just kind of telling him some of the things, and he did. He ended up staying with us for 2 months in our cleaning program and was able to get back on his feet. We found him a job, and, he kind of went on from there. And later on, I found out, so I did work with him on and off, but beyond that one initial interaction, that's really what I remember. And he later went on to accept Christ as a savior, and he became a missionary.
Wow.
And come to find out, he had been through hell on earth. He had been, he'd been in Rome for a while, and he had been kind of in these gangs in Rome, and had just been through things that people should never have to do in their life. And he published a book, and in that book, he devoted an entire section to that interaction. And he went on to say that he had actually been out on the street for about 20 minutes, pacing up and down in front of our sign that said Christian Youth Hostel, and didn't know if he should come in, and came in and was terrified that we would reject him, was terrified that we would judge him based on how he looked, based on anything, which I think, also goes for middle schoolers.
Right. Yes.
And he came in and he said he knew everything would be okay because the girl behind the desk smiled at him, and that smile changed his life. And all I did was smile. And, to find out that something so little can have such a huge impact. And so I think that was very humbling, but also just encouraging to know that we might not know it, but, the little things do matter, and the little things have a huge impact on someone's life.
Yes, and I wanted to emphasize that was a perfect emphasis, because our worst ministry moments a lot of times end up being the best ministry moments.
Yeah.
The college group you went to was absolutely chaos that night.
It was.
But God said, this is what I'm going to use to get you there. You had no idea that a smile would do anything for anybody at that point, especially in that condition.
Right.
And people are looking for light. And sometimes the smile is light.
Yeah.
In fact, we found out there's a book called If by Mark Batterson, written in 2015. He's a guy who didn't even like to read books, but knew he was going to be a writer. He's written 15 in the last 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and so he said didn't even like to read books. He wrote an If in this one book. He said, I'm not going to quote it correctly, but I'm going to get as close as possible, and that is, the reasons they turn away from God are not God at all. The reasons they turn away from God are from religion and things that God is not. Yeah. And so what God is that smile. What God is that person who accepts a man who wants forgiveness. And you go on and on. We look at Jesus, and who wouldn't want Jesus? But then you look at the way the church has treated people over the centuries, and that's the man-made part of religion that Jesus isn't. So awesome. That's good stuff. Yeah. Now, tell me your best ministry moment in middle school and best in adolescence that you can remember.
Best ministry moment is the realization that the relationships are there, that they're working. It's when, one of your middle school girls asks to have coffee with you as a high schooler. It's when one of your middle school girls invites you to her wedding. Yeah. It's when one of your...
And they're not getting married in middle school, though. They're a little bit older at that point.
When they're older, yes. I think it's the long run. It's the payoff in the long run. It's the realization that, it's when they call you, when they're about to make a big life decision to change a career and say, I really would like your opinion on this. And even if you haven't really talked to them in a year, and they still call you up, I think that's best ministry moments right there.
Absolutely. You may or may not remember this, but what I tried to say to all volunteer staff, and this is for these youth pastors listening, is we are dealing with people who are going to change our world. And not only our world, but going to change the world. Yeah. and we don't know who they are. But we know this: if we invest in them, they keep showing up in our lives as well.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard because at the time you just keep dealing with the hormones raging and the crying
this person
and
is
the
hopeless,
and she took my hair straightener and I don't want to go out in the snow, and you deal with that stuff, and worst ministry moment when you're forced to drive a van through a snowstorm down a mountain coming back from Tennessee. Thank you. Thank you for that.
So you're at I didn't remember that. My therapist will probably bring it up, but anyway.
Yes.
I made a lot of mistakes with different things. Probably you were one of the only ones who could at that point. Probably. I don't know how many vans we had at that point.
We all survived.
We had 3.
We all survived. So it worked out. It was fine.
Yeah, we didn't die.
Yes.
And we didn't have a wreck. So obviously the Holy Spirit had told me you were a good driver.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Yeah. Of course, you think about these trips and it's the silly stuff. It's the, it's the polar bear run and convincing the kids to do the polar bear run
Which is what? What's the polar bear?
Jumping in the ice cold water and walking behind Rick as he walks through the water with the huge duck or whatever it was that he had, and convincing them that they can do it, that they can handle it, and the whining and complaining, and then of course they do it, and then they play outside in the snow in their bathing suit for 20 more minutes.
That's right.
Don't tell the parents that.
No, never. The parents will never hear this.
Exactly.
Only youth pastors,
no.
Right?
And but that's the stuff that's memorable is and trying to really, I think that a lot of those memorable trip moments comes down to trying to convince kids they can do stuff they haven't done before. Those are the moments that come to mind. And then of course, watching them wipe out and fail, like when they try to do the little sled run and then they flip over and get a mouthful of snow and they're like, what just happened? And, but that's the stuff that you remember. Like that's the movie that plays over in your mind for sure. Mm-hmm. Stopping to, because it started snowing on some of those trips that it really wasn't that snowy.
Right, we're Florida people.
Yeah, stopping and being like, there's snow, and it's like this 4-foot patch of snow, and everybody jumps out to try to throw, a teeny tiny snowball at each other just to say that they've done it. I don't even remember which trip it was. One of them, we got there and I think you drove us, I don't even know how many miles, because you'd heard of this little sledding hill and we just had to, and we hadn't had snow on that trip up until that point, but you found some. Yeah. And the kids, they wanted to stay out there forever. It was, I don't even know. It had been 10 o'clock at night we were out there.
Yeah, because we had to drive a long way from where we were
and they
staying.
had lights.
Yeah.
There was, it was obviously lit up.
I think it's Beach Mountain. I think we went all the way to North Carolina from Tennessee.
Just
because the mountains,
that whole trying new things. That's what those trips are all about, is trying new things.
Yeah, it is. And we're going to throw Chad under the bus. Tell me about, tell us about the Universal Studios.
Yes. So we, Chad had to win the award for,
one of the staffers at that
most point. Just gruff, I don't know, just crotchety old man. He wins the crotchety old man award. Congratulations. It's not you, Doug. It's him.
I know. It's him. I know. I love
and he was
that.
only 28 or something like that. And we had been at Universal Studios all day for that, for the concerts and for the rides. And, it's a long day. Mm-hmm, it's a very, very long day and everyone's tired. And I, felt like I could sleep for a week and also had refrained from, harming middle school girls all day. So,
which is a big deal each time, right?
And it was time to go and it was time to load the van and we were trying to find the van. And we had gotten the girls to where they needed to be and it was just me and one of the other staffers, Whitney, because we didn't fit in the van where the car where the girls were. So we had to go get in this other van. It happened to be Chad's van. And Chad was ready to go. He did not want to wait. And we were trying to find where he was and we were on the phone with him and we were trying to figure it out. And he finally had given us directions and we start walking and he left. He was just done. He was done waiting. He straight up just left and left us in the garage at Universal Studios. And then to give him a little bit of credit, didn't understand that we didn't have anywhere else to go. He just thought that we were choosing to come ride with him. Oh. And he didn't want to wait for us. And then it was immediately informed that he had removed our only method of transportation home by leaving. And so had to turn around. But we were quite angry about that. There was a lot of yelling.
Yeah.
A lot of yelling.
And a lot of laughter about it
Yes,
for the next
eventually.
decade. Right,
yes,
right.
we still bring that up, I believe,
Absolutely.
just to give him a hard time.
And he is not as crotchety because he's married with 3 kids, and so he has to be less crotchety.
We made sure to tell his wife that story, though,
Absolutely.
before she married him,
Absolutely.
to make sure she
You wanna warn her.
understood what she was getting into.
That's right. Well, listen, anything else you want to tell Youth Worker Nation, youth pastors, and particularly?
You were just so enthusiastic, and I think one of the biggest things, I mean, the kids, I mean, they would laugh at your antics a lot, but they knew that you would do whatever it took. I mean, that was, I mean, just visibly, like I said, when you drove us, miles away to find snow, but just even, I mean, I remember filling, I feel like thousands of water balloons because they wanted a water balloon fight, and they wanted it, and you said, let's have it. Let's have this water balloon fight. I mean, so just, demonstrating to them that you'll do what it takes to really make it fun and make it memorable. But you also really had this way of allowing relationships to form. And, we were able to kind of split our huge groups into smaller groups and forge those, especially at the middle school level. I mean, those girls just wanted somebody they felt comfortable with to listen to what they were dealing with every single day. And we had those opportunities, we had our big, group activities and things like that. But you were very hands off about that. You were just very hands off and allowed kind of the girls to gravitate towards the staffer that they felt like would listen to them and felt comfortable with them. And it would just kind of naturally happen. And I think that was very good because it made them feel like they were in a safe place, and it made them feel more comfortable with sharing bits and pieces of themselves with the staffers and with who was there, and it allowed for those relationships to become much stronger.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the one thing that I emphasize to people, especially, there's more small churches than there are big churches. There are more medium-sized churches than there are big churches. But the small and the medium-sized churches, they often think, let's keep our people together, middle school through 78 years of age. And no. But I mean, we separate those things no matter how small we are. But then we separate again because I got a clue that guys do not understand girls. And girls do not understand guys.
Yes, I'm glad you realized that.
Yes. And so in those environments, the best thing that I believe any youth pastor could do is make sure they let their women handle their girls.
Definitely. And
if they're a guy.
Especially, at middle and high school age, those are just such rough, for both girls and guys. But
yes.
I mean, those are just such rough ages. You're really just kind of coming into yourself, and you want to talk to someone you feel like has been through it.
Yeah.
You want to talk to someone who feels like they would understand.
And you were not so far removed that, you girls look like you were in high school, when you were in your 20s.
Thanks, Doug.
You still do, actually. I don't think you've changed at all. And
that's why you're my favorite.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I've seen lady full-time youth pastors try to deal mostly with the guys. They don't really get that either. You just can't do that. So thank you for saying that. Youth Worker Nation, you need to hear that. And if you're not doing that, don't think that you're exception to the rule. You are not. Girls are still girls. The guys are still guys.
You just got to keep believing in what you do because you just don't know. You just don't know when that one little thing and follow, feel confident in what you're being told. Feel confident in, if God speaks to you or if you kind of feel in your heart, follow those messages because they just sometimes will lead you to do something that you might not understand, but which means the world to somebody else.
Yeah, and keep on keeping on because you might have a chaotic group session that will send somebody to Amsterdam.
Exactly.
All right, Youth Worker Nation, we're out of here. Nicole, say goodbye, Youth Worker Nation.
Bye, thank you.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.